There comes a moment in a Sigma male's life when he stops trying to explain who he is, not because he's given up, but because he's finally free. For years he's been analyzed, mislabeled, and underestimated by people who only saw fragments of his depth. They called his silence arrogance, his independence coldness, and his distance pride. But what they never understood was that his quiet wasn't emptiness. It was calculation. His solitude wasn't loneliness. It was alignment. Now he's done translating his language for people who only listen to noise. The Sigma male has learned that understanding doesn't come from words. It comes from energy, consistency, and depth. He's not here to prove anything anymore. He's here to move in peace. Because when a Sigma stops seeking validation, he becomes unstoppable. This isn't about rebellion, it's about evolution. The world will keep trying to define him, but he's already written his own meaning. If you've ever been misunderstood for your silence, your distance, or your intensity, this video is for you. Subscribe to UltraWise for more deep explorations of the Sigma mind. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt more powerful after choosing silence over explanation? The exhaustion of constant misinterpretation. There's a quiet kind of fatigue that builds in a Sigma male, not from work, not from effort, but from being misunderstood. It's the exhaustion of constantly having to explain intentions that were never hidden in the first place. He speaks less because every word he says gets twisted into something it's not. His calm is mistaken for coldness, his focus for arrogance, his solitude for loneliness. He watches people react to their own projections, not his reality, and over time, it drains him. Not emotionally at first, but spiritually. He realizes that no matter how clearly he tries to communicate, most people listen only to reply, not to understand. At first, he tries to fix it. He over-explains, softens his tone, tries to meet others where they are. But the more he does, the more he feels himself fading. He starts to recognize that every explanation he gives is an emotional transaction that costs him authenticity. The world doesn't reward clarity, it rewards conformity. And that's something the Sigma male refuses to do. So instead of fighting to be understood, he begins to conserve his energy. He lets silence carry the message. He lets his actions reveal his truth. The exhaustion transforms into wisdom. He learns that being misunderstood is the tax you pay for being self-aware in a world built on noise. It's not his job to correct every false perception. It's his job to protect his peace. This realization shifts everything. He no longer sees misunderstanding as rejection, but as redirection. The wrong people will always misread depth as distance. The right ones won't need to be convinced. So he stops explaining. He stops trying to translate his internal world for people who speak the language of ego. Instead, he observes. He watches who listens with presence and who listens with agenda. And through that observation, he regains his strength. The Sigma male's silence is no longer exhaustion, it's evolution. Because once you've been misunderstood enough times, you realize clarity isn't something you give others, it's something you become for yourself. When silence becomes self-respect. There's a pivotal shift in the Sigma male's life when silence stops being a defense mechanism and becomes an act of self-respect. He no longer uses quiet as a shield from chaos, but as a boundary that protects his energy. The world around him thrives on reaction. People argue to feel seen, provoke to feel powerful, and speak endlessly to avoid listening. But the Sigma male? He's mastered the pause. He's learned that silence is not weakness, it's control. Because in silence, no one can twist your meaning, drain your emotions, or manipulate your truth. He begins to see that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. True power moves quietly. His silence unnerves manipulators, disarms narcissists, and forces shallow people to face themselves. It's not passive, it's deliberate. Every time he chooses silence over reaction, he's sending a message. You no longer have access to my energy. That realization becomes his liberation. At first, people mistake it for withdrawal. They think he's cold, detached, or uninterested, but what they don't see is that silence is his form of emotional sovereignty. He's done explaining his intentions to those committed to misunderstanding them. He's done wasting his words on ears that only hear ego. Silence becomes his language of self-worth, a language few can truly read. He starts responding less and observing more. He studies patterns, motives, and energy. When others explode in emotion, he analyzes. When others beg to be right, he stays centered. It's not that he doesn't feel deeply. It's that he's disciplined enough not to let emotions dictate his peace. His silence becomes his statement, his composure his armor. And in that restraint, he finds something far more valuable than validation. He finds clarity. The Sigma male doesn't need to win arguments anymore. He wins by walking away. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. His presence speaks for him. His silence isn't empty, it's full of intention. Because the moment a man realizes he doesn't owe anyone a reaction, he reclaims his freedom. And for the Sigma male, that's not detachment, that's dignity. A shift from explaining to observing. At some point, the Sigma male realizes that the more he explains himself, the less people actually listen. Explanations become noise to those who are never willing to understand, and a trap that drains him of power. So he stops. He withdraws from the exhausting cycle of justification and begins to observe instead. Observation becomes his new form of intelligence. Silent, precise, and unshakably calm. He stops needing to be understood and starts learning who deserves his understanding. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after countless moments of being misread, his honesty mistaken for arrogance, his silence mistaken for guilt, his independence mistaken for selfishness. Each misunderstanding teaches him the same lesson. Not everyone sees from the same depth. So instead of fighting to prove his intentions, he begins to watch how people reveal theirs. Every reaction becomes data. Every inconsistency becomes a truth he didn't have to ask for. The Sigma male learns more from silence than most people learn from speeches. Explaining was about trying to connect. Observing is about protecting his peace. He begins to see patterns that others miss. How some people use confusion as manipulation. How others project their own fears as judgment. Where he once spoke to clear things up, now he stays quiet to see what unfolds. This silence is not distance, it's strategy. It's how he gathers information, how he filters energy, how he stays in control. And when he does speak, his words carry weight, because they're not reactions, they're conclusions. His restraint gives his voice authority. People start to notice that his presence itself demands respect, not because he's loud, but because he's measured. The less he explains, the more powerful he becomes. Not in domination, but in clarity. This shift marks the beginning of emotional mastery. He no longer trades peace for validation. He lets others misunderstand him if they must, because while they're busy talking, he's busy seeing. And in that quiet observation, he discovers the truth that changes everything. Power doesn't come from being heard. It comes from understanding when silence says more. The detachment from external validation. There's a moment in every Sigma male's evolution when he realizes that the validation he's been waiting for, the approval, the recognition, the praise, was never coming. And suddenly, he doesn't need it anymore. It's not bitterness, it's awakening. He sees how much energy people waste trying to be seen, trying to be understood, trying to earn acceptance from minds that can't even see themselves clearly. So he steps back not out of pride, but out of clarity. He understands that external validation is a leash, and the moment you stop needing it, you become untouchable. In the past, he tried to prove himself quietly, through excellence, through integrity, through consistency. But over time, he realized something deeper. No matter how much value you bring, some people will still choose to misunderstand you because your peace threatens their noise. And that's when detachment becomes his power. He no longer looks for reflection in others. He becomes his own mirror. He evaluates himself by his progress, not by applause. His worth stops being negotiable the moment he defines it internally. Detachment doesn't mean he stops caring. It means he stops performing. He no longer shapes his identity around how others perceive him. Their approval doesn't elevate him, and their disapproval doesn't weaken him. The Sigma male's validation now comes from discipline, from emotional control, from mastering his response instead of chasing their reaction. The irony is, when he stops trying to prove his value, people start to feel it even more. Because nothing commands respect like indifference to it. He begins to live differently, quieter but freer. He makes choices not to impress but to align. His success is personal, not performative. His confidence isn't loud. It's steady, and his detachment isn't cold. It's clean. The Sigma male doesn't reject connection, he rejects dependence. Because once you stop needing validation from others, you start operating from truth instead of fear. That's when he becomes something rare. A man whose peace can't be bought, whose worth can't be debated, and whose silence can't be misread. His detachment isn't emptiness, it's the fullness of finally realizing that everything he was seeking outside was already within. Putting misunderstanding into motivation. For most people, being misunderstood feels like rejection. For the Sigma male, it becomes fuel. What once frustrated him now drives him. Every time someone underestimates him, misjudges his silence, or mistakes his calm for weakness, he stores it quietly. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. He doesn't need to be seen to be significant. He's learned that misunderstanding isn't a barrier. It's a filter. It reveals who's capable of depth and who's trapped in the surface. In the beginning, those misunderstandings cut deep. He used to question himself. Maybe I am too distant, too cold, too hard to read. But eventually he realized something profound. People can only meet you at the level of their awareness. When they misinterpret you, they're not defining you, they're exposing their limits. And that realization flips the entire narrative. Instead of trying to explain himself to small minds, he channels his energy into becoming undeniable. Every slight, every doubt, every false perception becomes a quiet motivator. While others gossip, he works. While they talk about what they think he's doing, he's already 3 steps ahead, building in silence. His calm becomes his engine. His restraint becomes his focus. He doesn't need to defend his reputation because results do it for him. Misunderstanding once drained him. Now it fuels his evolution. He starts to see that being misunderstood is proof he's thinking differently. The average mind doesn't understand discipline without ego, strength without dominance, or confidence without noise. The Sigma male lives in paradox, and only those willing to think deeply can truly recognize it. So instead of seeking acceptance, he embraces invisibility. He moves in shadows, creates quietly, and lets time reveal what words never could. His motivation is no longer external validation, it's mastery. Every misjudgment becomes a spark, every dismissal a silent dare. Because while they underestimate him, he's evolving. And one day, when his work speaks louder than their words, they'll finally understand, too late, that the man they misunderstood wasn't cold, arrogant, or distant. He was simply becoming. Mastering emotional translation. By the time the Sigma male stops explaining himself, he's already mastered something few ever do: the art of emotional translation. It's not that he doesn't feel deeply, he just learned how to process those emotions through logic before they turn into reactions. He studies his own feelings the same way others study problems, with patience, awareness, and precision. Where most people lash out, he pauses. Where others spiral into overthinking, he decodes. The Sigma male understands that emotion is data, and once you can interpret it, you control it. He no longer takes offense easily because he sees beneath the surface of people's behavior. Anger? Usually fear in disguise. Arrogance? A mask for insecurity. Manipulation? A desperate grab for control. He reads emotions like languages, not battles, and because of that, he rarely gets emotionally hijacked. His calm is not indifference, it's fluency. He's learned how to translate pain into wisdom, confusion into clarity, and discipline into discipline. That's why he appears unshakable. It's not that he doesn't feel, it's that he understands what he feels. This emotional literacy becomes his superpower. It allows him to stay centered in chaos, composed under pressure, and unpredictable to anyone trying to manipulate him. Narcissists can't bait him. Emotional vampires can't drain him. Drama simply dies in his presence because he refuses to feed it. His silence is not avoidance, it's mastery, the result of decoding every emotional trap before it's sprung. And yet this control doesn't make him robotic. It makes him precise. He still feels empathy, still cares deeply, but he directs that energy consciously. He invests his emotions where they create value, not where they're exploited. His restraint is his respect for himself. He's learned that emotional control isn't suppression, it's sophistication. People who once called him distant start to realize he's just disciplined. He doesn't let feelings lead him blindly. He lets understanding guide him forward. That's why his calm presence carries power. It's emotional intelligence weaponized by self-awareness. The Sigma male's emotions no longer control his story. He does. Because when you master emotional translation, you stop reacting to life and start orchestrating it. The calm power of being unavailable. There's a quiet strength in the Sigma male that confuses people. He's calm, composed, and unreachable in ways they can't explain. That's because he's discovered the ultimate form of control, being unavailable, not in a cruel or arrogant way, but in a deeply intentional one. He no longer gives his time, energy, or presence to anyone who hasn't earned it. His silence, once misunderstood as distance, has become his filter, separating those who value him from those who only consume him. When the Sigma male becomes unavailable, it's not about ego, it's about energy economics. He's learned that attention is a currency, and most people spend it recklessly. Every conversation, every favor, every emotional reaction costs something, and he refuses to go bankrupt by investing in chaos. Instead, he practices selective access. He chooses peace over presence, purpose over popularity. This makes his absence more powerful than most people's constant availability. People begin to notice. Those who used to take him for granted start to feel the vacuum his energy once filled. The ones who dismissed his quietness now find themselves haunted by it. Because his unavailability isn't punishment, it's reflection. It forces others to confront how little they contributed to the connection. The Sigma doesn't chase closure or attention anymore. He lets his silence reveal the truth. His calm becomes magnetic. There's something unsettling about a man who doesn't need to prove his worth, who doesn't rush to respond, who's too focused on his mission to be distracted by noise. In a world addicted to attention, his restraint becomes rebellion. And that rebellion radiates power, the kind that can't be explained, only felt. Being unavailable allows him to stay grounded. It gives him space to think, create, and grow without interruption. It protects his mind from manipulation, his heart from exploitation, and his goals from dilution. The Sigma male understands that distance isn't detachment, it's discipline. He doesn't disappear to hide, he disappears to refine. And that's his quiet advantage. While others are busy trying to be everywhere, he's mastering the art of being exactly where he's needed. His calm isn't absence, it's control. His unavailability isn't rejection, it's evolution. Redefining connection on his own terms. At the end of his evolution, the Sigma male realizes that connection was never about proximity, it was about alignment. He no longer seeks relationships that fill time, he seeks ones that fuel growth. He stops chasing emotional availability from people who mistake attention for intimacy and noise for depth. Instead, he builds a quiet world where every connection has meaning, not maintenance. Where conversations feel like expansion, not exhaustion. He understands now that genuine connection doesn't demand constant contact. It thrives in mutual respect and space. He no longer feels guilty for needing solitude or misunderstood for craving peace. The people who truly get him don't take his silence personally. They see it as part of his rhythm. He doesn't explain his boundaries anymore. He lives them, and those who can stand in his silence without fear are the ones who earn access to his world. Connection for him becomes a mirror of emotional maturity. He no longer needs people to complete him, only to complement him. He doesn't chase energy, he attracts it through calmness, purpose, and self-respect. He's learned that being connected doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means being authentic with the few who align. That shift changes everything. Relationships stop feeling heavy, love stops feeling performative. Every bond that remains is lighter, truer, and more rooted in peace. And because he no longer measures connection through words or presence, he finds himself surrounded by fewer people, but stronger energy. The Sigma male's version of connection is subtle yet profound. It's the understanding that he doesn't have to lose himself to feel close to someone. The moment he redefined connection on his own terms, he stopped being lonely because now, even in solitude, he feels connected to truth. His relationships evolve from emotional dependence to energetic alignment. His heart no longer begs to be seen. It simply recognizes who already sees him without explanation. That's the quiet victory of a Sigma male. When connection stops being about who stays near and starts being about who stands real. In the end, the Sigma male's greatest transformation isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unshakably self-declared. He's no longer searching for understanding from the world because he's already found it within himself. The silence that once felt isolating has turned into his sanctuary. The misunderstandings that once drained him now fuel his focus. He's not cold, he's clear. He's not distant, he's deliberate. Because when a Sigma male stops trying to be understood, he finally becomes free. Free from needing validation, free from explaining depth to those committed to shallowness, and free to live on his own terms, calm, confident, and completely in control of his energy. If you've ever felt like your silence was mistaken for weakness, or your peace was misunderstood as pride, you already know this path. You're not broken, you're just evolving. Subscribe to UltraWise for more deep dives into Sigma psychology, power, and emotional intelligence. And tell me in the comments, what's one thing you stopped explaining that changed your life forever?